Joining us, MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin, New York Times D.C. correspondent covering the Justice Department, Glenn Thrush, and Morning Joe co-host and staff writer for The Atlantic, Jonathan Lemire. Is this what's happening? The Supreme Court has not taken this up, so Donald Trump is turning to his Department of Justice, Glenn?
Yes. Next question. No, I think what is going on here and what is so striking about this, and I should just say that the details of this remain very much up in the air. I think last night we were hearing that Jean Carroll was being investigated for perjury. We are now hearing various other potential charges. It's very confusing. Again, we have a situation where the criminal or the purported criminal is chosen before a crime can be determined, which is a characteristic of the Justice Department under President Trump. But the general most striking feature about this investigation is how closely it mirrors the defense arguments that Trump made in his two civil trials against Jean Carroll and the public attacks that he leveled against her during those trials. This almost more than any other action this department has taken in recent months, and this is saying a lot, I think indicates the lack of any boundaries between arguments that Trump has made in his own personal interests and the use of the government, the mobilization of the Justice Department on his behalf. You have Todd Blanche, his former defense lawyer, running the show. He has technically recused himself, but his deputy, Trent McCotter, has pursued this. It seems like the investigation began in Washington. But again, just to underscore it, it just seems very, very similar to the kinds of arguments that Blanche and other Trump defense lawyers made for him as a private citizen.
Yeah, that was the question I was going to ask. How much stock do you put in Todd Blanche recusing himself on this? After all, Todd Blanche was the one who defended him in this case.
Yeah, it's only a small portion of it in the civil appeals, but yeah, I mean, the other question, and this telescopes out, I think this is actually kind of the second shoe falling from this weaponization fund that they created last week. Again, it is very much rooted in Trump's personal grievance. The weaponization fund was sort of a duct tape solution to his $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS, which again was the president of the United States seeking money from the government he controls. So again, I think both the weaponization fund idea, the IRS stuff, and the Jean Carroll dynamic indicate a switching away from going after officials who either defied Trump or investigated him to a different sphere in which Trump is attempting to go after private citizens who have made accusations against him, and also to recover funds for his own personal and business interests.
So I tried to get Robbie Kaplan to come on the show today. She politely declined. She represented E. Jean Carroll during these trials. But I'd like to hear from you. What is your legal perspective of this action?
You're talking about the legal perspective of the investigation?
Yeah.
I think it's a totally uphill climb for the Department of Justice to establish that E. Jean Carroll perjured herself, if that is, in fact, where the investigation is going. Glenn's comment that there may be other avenues is the first that I've heard of that. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that they're focused on potential perjury. You've got an appeals court decision saying, essentially, that's not what happened. Trump was upset about the fact that the district court judge excluded testimony from E. Jean Carroll about this question of whether or not her lawyers received outside litigation funding and whether or not she had lied at her deposition when she said that she was not aware of any outside litigation funding. And I just want to say, the three-judge panel that affirmed that verdict said Ms. Carroll plausibly represented that she had forgotten about the limited outside funding counsel obtained in September of 2020 when this question was first posed to her in 2022, and the additional discovery did not indicate otherwise. Three judges on the Second Circuit reviewing that verdict say there's no evidence to indicate E. Jean Carroll was lying, and yet in order to prove perjury in a federal court, you have to show that it was a knowing false statement and a willful misstatement.
Why is it important that she did not remember that? What is the implication of the legal team receiving some outside funding?
So Trump's lawyers say that the fact that she Again, they allege that she purposefully concealed this, and they say that that bears on two things. One, whether there was actual malice in the case, and whether or not Donald Trump was telling the truth about her. And they say the jury should have been entitled to hear evidence that E. Jean Carroll made one representation at her deposition and then suddenly remembered that her lawyers had received outside funding. Both the district court judge and the Second Circuit determined that it was of no moment whatsoever, and even if it was, there was no evidence that she wasn't telling the truth.
Does that bear on her allegation that Donald Trump sexually abused her?
No, and that's what the district court judge concluded. He also concluded that it had nothing to do with her credibility as a witness overall. And so, again, Katie, you've had now 3 courts say that this wasn't relevant, at least 3. The district court judge, an appeals court panel, and the entire appeals court said last week, we're not going to rehear this.
Why hasn't the Supreme Court taken this up?
So the Supreme Court has had a fully briefed cert petition, meaning a petition for review, for many, many months now. And they have held it over for conference now, I believe, 12 times, including they may have heard it today. We'll hear from them soon enough, whether they in fact discuss this case today or are pushing it down the road again. One theory is that they keep pushing it down the road because they want to be in a position to hear both E. Jean Carroll cases together. Only one of them has reached the Supreme Court so far.
So what would be their why does this matter to them? How can Donald Trump bring a civil suit like this to the Supreme Court?
There are a bunch of evidentiary issues that Donald Trump believes are of sufficient importance that the U.S. Supreme Court should weigh in here. They range in importance from things bearing on her credibility to the question of whether a particular witness should have testified because when she said Donald Trump sexually assaulted her on an airplane, that was not, in fact, a crime defined as a sexual assault in federal law at the time. There are a whole bunch of minor legal issues here, but I think you're right to say this was a private lawsuit between two people who are private citizens about defamation and sexual abuse. It was not necessarily a case of the kind of overall legal importance that justifies the Supreme Court's time. And indeed, the Supreme Court may tell Donald Trump, you have to live with the decisions of the Second Circuit here.
Thank you for all of that. Let's talk about the politics of this, Jonathan Lemire. Donald Trump is obviously obsessed with these cases that he faced while he was no longer in office. And he's been systematically trying to take out the people, it seems, that have been involved, either the people at the FBI or DOJ who have investigated him or going after Letitia James, et cetera, those who investigated him here in New York State. I am still surprised, should I be surprised, that Donald Trump is now going after E. Jean Carroll?
This seems like an additional step, but no, it's no surprise. This is the retribution campaign he promised to enact. He has staffed his administration with people who will blindly follow his whims and wishes. And he made clear that he will use the power of the government in order to exact punishment for his perceived political foes. And you're right to focus on those he feels like wronged him during the criminal and now civil matters that he faced while he was out of office. Even though those close to the president would privately say those trials, and particularly the one in New York City, were the best thing that happened to him politically, because it allowed Republicans to rally around him, and he was able to claim that he was the victim of an overzealous government prosecution, and it helped fuel his comeback. But he is angry. He is angry. He felt the trial was humiliating, and he felt this payout. He insists he's never done anything wrong, though he was found liable, and that he wants to exact some form of vengeance. And we are seeing a compliant Department of Justice, first with Pam Bondi, and now Todd Blanche, recusal or not, the DOJ is willing to carry out Trump's wishes.
How does the White House feel about this? Donald Trump is facing headwinds in the midterm, so is the Republican Party. They keep talking about how he's going to focus on politicking and campaigning and the economy. They keep saying this. Scott Bessent is going to come out and talk about the economy and the ways the administration is trying to help folks. He's talking about the Trump accounts right now, but we're not hearing a lot of that from the president. So are they happy about this investigation? Yet another headline that is not about what Donald Trump is doing to help the American citizen?
There's certainly no attempt to stop him. And that is also by design. The people close to the president, they don't view their jobs as trying to get in the way of a bad idea. They view their jobs as trying to empower President Trump. They trust him, though, of course, privately, in meetings in the West Wing, and certainly on the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue, there are plenty of Republicans who think that Trump has had misplaced priorities for the better part of a year now. That once they got their signature piece of legislation done last summer, the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill, Trump has solely focused on things, whether it's the retribution campaign, and this is the latest example, monuments to himself, his own legacy, or foreign military adventures, instead of doing what he promised to do, which was, drive down prices and steer the economy for more and more Americans. In fact, so many of his decisions, notably the Iran war, but also tariffs and some other calls he has made, has actually hurt the economy and certainly hurt Republicans. And very few dare publicly defy him, but there is plenty of backroom grumbling and complaining that Trump's priorities are in great disconnect with what would actually help the Republican Party this November.
Glenn, I'm going to try to bridge an old beat of yours and bring it to this new beat. Todd Blanche has not proven to be an exceptionally popular figure on Capitol Hill, at least not in recent week. The Anti-Weaponization Fund, after it was announced, he got an earful from Senate Republicans about it. How are they going to feel about this?
Well, they'll get another crack at him on the House side on Tuesday when he goes before the Appropriates Committee again. So that'll be a relatively lively session, I think. Look, piggybacking on what Jonathan said, a lot of people, including folks who say everything that Donald Trump does is great in public, think that bringing up Jean Carroll right now is exactly the wrong thing to do. I mean, Trump, if you look at Trump's numbers, they're flagging with some of his core supporters, including non-college educated white males, for instance. But his numbers among women across the board are awful. And the individual details of the Jean Carroll case, which Trump has, I should say, refuted and said that they were fabricated, are not complimentary towards him. And they will not improve the chances of Republicans of gaining inroads with women in an already extremely challenging environment. So I will tell you, inside the Justice Department, it's kind of moved from just being an issue, and on the Hill as well. It's moved from being an issue where people were pretty much saying he could walk on water and do anything that he wanted, and everything was a show of his strength and power. And now people, I think, are starting to really wonder if he's just going off in a direction that's going to be tremendously destructive to himself and everybody else.
As Lindsey Graham said, he's got the power to make it. He's got the power to destroy the party as well.